reinforcements sent to Baringo South after bandits attacked GSU personnel at Kapindasum village, leading to a fierce gun battle that lasted 4 hours on Tuesday.
Public servants to embark on a 2-month wealth declaration exercise starting November 1st as part of a biennial practice to see if their wealth matches their salaries.
And Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Wetangula, to deliver communication on the fate of proposed changes to the Deputy Minority Whip seat this afternoon.
Yes, good morning and welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. My name is Fred Indimuli. It promises to be a warm day, highs of 27 degrees Celsius, lows of 16 degrees, with a 20% chance at precipitation. Well, I continue with my Christmas countdown. 61 days to go to Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Speaking of Christmas, by the way, and actually the whole matters to expect food. This particular morning, we dive into the whole discussion about matters food insecurity. And actually, my proverb, African proverb, comes from that. The chicken that digs for food will not sleep hungry. Think about that this morning. But then tune in around 8 a.m. to talk about matters food insecurity.
Well, and of course, you can keep interacting with us throughout this show at TV47 News on X, at TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe. I'm Flora Limuki.
Before we take a look at the day's diary, let's get the top story. The National Police Service has denied reports of a siege by bandits on a General Service Unit camp in Baringo's Kapindasum location. Police spokesperson Resila Onyango clarified that the police camp was not attacked as earlier claimed, noting that the area was calm. A preliminary report indicated that a GSU patrol team came under attack by suspected Pokot bandits on Tuesday afternoon at a river crossing. Police said a shootout ensued when the patrol team of GSU on board their vehicle were crossing River Kapindasum to the adjacent primary school on their routine security check. Following the incident, the GSU officers received reinforcements from the Rapid Deployment Unit and additional GSU officers from neighboring camps, as well as local reservists, to battle the suspected bandits. No report on possible casualties has been made.
Well, and let's now have a look at the diary this morning and see as for Ministry of Public Service, Performance and Delivery Management, Moses Kuria will inspect the inaugural NYS ceremonial parade, which he is expected to unveil the NYS engineering blueprint today at Ruaraka. And Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education enters day 3 with candidates expected to continue their practical exams as they start their home science practicals. And the National Dialogue Committee meeting enters day 3 in Naivasha as they prepare for a comprehensive report after the public hearings in the last few weeks. And away from that, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua's tour in Belgium and Germany enters day 2 and is on an official visit for the Global Gateway Forum. The Deputy President will also extend his travel to Germany for other engagements on coffee, climate change and renewable energy, among others. It is the Global Media and Information Literacy Week, with this year's theme being Media and Information Literacy in Digital Spaces, a collective global agenda. The goal is to bring together different perspectives to develop new ideas and reinforce existing initiatives to advance media information literacy in the digital environment. It is also the International Artist Day, and this day has been created so that we can celebrate the incredible world of art and all of the amazing and creative works that artists around the world carry out. And looking at also today, the Departmental Committee on Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations will this Wednesday have a meeting at the County Hall to commence vetting of the 27 ambassadorial nominees as indicated in the schedule today. And looking at today in history, on this day, 1969, the government security personnel killed 11 ethnic Luo during a visit by President Jomo Kenyatta to Kisumu, where he was going to open a hospital. And that was also his final visit to that region until his demise in 1978. Also today in history, in 1962, Uganda became a member state of the United Nations. And in 1760, King George III started his reign as a king of Great Britain and Ireland. And that is what we have on our diary this morning. Of course, we keep on updating you as the show moves on. Let's now look at the dailies.
Yes, let's take a look at the dailies this morning. We start off with the Standard newspaper. Varsity fees shocker. That's a big headline on the Standard this morning. Funding crisis. All university and college students will now pay fees after the new funding formula was reviewed to factor in scholarships, tuition fees, household contribution and students boom. Even as institutions slide into crisis over delayed funding. The story is on page 6. And on the reviewed formula, the government has reviewed the initial formula that puts students into 4 categories. That's vulnerable, extremely needy, and less needy. In the previous formula, the first 2 groups were exempted from paying fees, but in the revised formula, all students must pay varying percentages of fees. The first group is now called Band 1, or previously called the vulnerable. Now they'll have to pay at least 5% of their fees, with the rest 70% coming from scholarships and 25% from loans. Band 2 will have to pay 10% fees, with the 60% coming from scholarships, 30% from loans. Band 3, which was the previously needy, will have to pay 20% fees, and with 50% coming from scholarships and the rest from loans. Band 4, 30% fees, 40% scholarships, the rest coming from loans. And there's a new band, Band 5, a new category of students who will have to pay at least 40% of the fees, with only 30% coming from scholarships and 30% from loans. They've also given the amounts that will be granted to these students for upkeep. And that's the big headline on the Standard this morning, varsity fees shocker. The other big story given prominence on the front page of the Standard today is at the bottom strip, which is a news feature, why the youth are getting hooked on e-cigarettes. The story is on page 10. And Chalo calls it fuaka. Elsewhere on the Standard, the business pages, weak shilling inflicts a 32 billion shilling loss on KQ. I think we've gotten used to this kind of headlines, KQ and losses. So the story is on page 18. And on the top strip of the Standard today, widower in fight for men to inherit spouse's property. That is on page 3. Elsewhere on the international pages, sad tales of Hamas captives. Stories on page 20 of the Standard. On the enterprise pullout of the Standard, the inside pages, power of the cloud for small enterprises. That's a big story there. And in sports, South Africa rugby star probed over Slough. If we could just flip the page, the Standard, and look at the back page. For Dortmund, the end seems to justify the means. Gaining inside knowledge might be part of Borussia Dortmund's newly adopted self-image, coming along as a wave of pragmatism, or as coach Edin Terzic puts it, we might act less sexy but more successful. This is ahead of their decisive UEFA Champions League encounter against group surprise Newcastle tonight. And yes, this reminds me that Arsenal and Man United were playing last night. Both were successful, but I think the bigger victory I think should go to Arsenal because they were playing away to Sevilla. Man United, meanwhile, were hosting, which team were they hosting?
Moving on to Daily Nation.
FC Copenhagen. FC Copenhagen at the Old Trafford, and they managed 1 goal. Meanwhile,
Only.
Arsenal has 2 away goals, which is interesting. Congratulations to both teams.
Representing all many fans, makofi kwetu. Moving on to Daily Nation and focusing on matters education as well. A bit to raise school fees, talking about education. Suppliers are crying foul over delayed payments. So parents have been warned to prepare to dig deeper into their pockets to keep their children in class from next term, with head teachers blaming the current high cost of living for pushing up food prices and escalating overhead costs. Public institution managers are also accusing the government of failing to release full capitation amounts. That story is on page 7. They give you the current annual capitation per learner. So they break it down from secondary boarding schools and also secondary day schools, as well as special needs schools, and also the primary schools, and what each category gets in matters capitation. They also say the funds are meant to be dispersed in tranches 50, 30, 20 over the 3 school terms. From matters education, on the right strip, to matters county politics, Mwangaza on the cross again. So rival comes in the proposed impeachment of Meru Governor Kawira Mwangaza, are engaged in behind-the-scenes lobbying to bolster the positions ahead of a vote slated for today at the Assembly. Ward representatives are set to hear Governor Mwangaza's defense this morning. So the county boss has been accused of gross violation of the Constitution, gross misconduct, and abuse of office. We have seen this script before, so we do expect to see how this will be playing out this morning. Below there, the matters probe, still on the right strip, MPs summon Sozuri over 1 billion shillings payout for SGR land, and how, quote-unquote, Majukwal has tamed road crashes at Black Spot. Talking about the Salgasa-Changwan stretch, was perhaps the most notorious black spot in the country, but not anymore. And this again reminds me, Fred, by the way, even as we're having the countdown for Christmas, it is imperative to also remind people to drive safely.
Oh yes, indeed, because I'm reminded of the fact that starting this week, most schools are closing down.
Oh yes.
So there'll be a lot of movement as learners try to find their way back home, especially ahead of the KCP exams, which start on Monday. And even as KCSE continues, the other lower classes, that's Form 3 to Form 1, will be closing this week. So yes, there'll be a lot of movement, and after that, now kupeleka watoto kushago.
Yeah.
So
even
yes,
people traveling, countryside. Yeah. Away from that, on the top strip of Daily Nation, matters lifestyle audit. Civil servants have until December 31st to declare their wealth. And matters sports there. Manyala speaks out on sudden change of coach. The unexpected happened. It's on page 33. And as we flip on the back page of Daily Nation, matters health there. Radical plans to boost healthcare in NHIF changes. So the National Assembly will allot funds to the SHIF, Social Health Insurance Functions. Talking about lawmakers investigating allegations of collusion, overbilling, and connivance at the NHIF. The quota number there, 85 billion Kenyan shillings. So data presented in Parliament shows this is the amount that the National Health Insurance Fund collects annually. Wow. That is the front page, rather the whole front and back page of Daily Nation. To Business Daily?
Well, let's have a look at the People Daily, rather.
Okay.
Yeah. And the People Daily, the headline there, the top headline, how a weak shilling will hurt Kenyans. And Central Bank says local currency is overvalued, meaning it is likely to depreciate until it finds a free market. And, just a brief explanation there. 150 to 154 is the exchange rate of the shilling against US dollar, depending on whether one is buying or selling. Some banks were quoting the dollar at 156 shillings. And the reason why might be affected because the cost of medicine is set to go up because Kenya is a net import of pharmaceutical products. This can be reversed by local production. And in terms of electricity, will also cost more because Kenya uses the thermal power. This will push up due to the set cost of living. And food prices are set to go up, and prices of cooking oil and wheat also set to go up at a time when Kenya's food import bill has gone up. 17.8% is the value by which shilling has lost against the US dollar since January. And in terms of luxury goods, with Christmas and New Year beckoning, Kenya will pay more for electronics, vehicles, and other luxury goods. And most of the Kenya's debts are based on foreign currencies. A weaker shilling make the debt burden heavier. That is just a quick look of how a weak shilling will hurt Kenyans. And some matters education, there learners to take break until January. Also on the right strip of the People Daily this morning, Nairobi set for King's Queen's visit next week. Tight but interesting itinerary for British royal couple in a maiden trip since coronation. And the King and the Queen are expected in the country on 31st of October, that is next Tuesday. And some matters, world news, Obama questions Israeli military response to Hamas. That is what we have on the People Daily this morning.
Let's take a look at the Star. And on the Star this Wednesday, CS Chelugui and Mandago linked to jobs scandal. That's a big headline on the front page of the Star today. CS and Senator linked to firm that allegedly duped poor youth seeking overseas talks. With false promises, jobless youth sold property to secure work abroad. That's a big headline on the Star today. The other big story given prominence on the front page and has to do with the shilling, US dollar versus Kenyan shilling, and a graph there showing the dollar fluctuation over the last 10 months to the highest this month, 151 shilling to a dollar. This source is from the central bank and just goes to show how the shilling has consistently grown weaker over the last 10 months. Each and every month, it loses something. The other highlights on the front page of the Star: Sunlight row blocks housing project in city. Elsewhere, fierce shootout as gunmen engage police in Baringo. And on the top strip of the Star, sex workers to enjoy more freedom in new crime bill. This one is linked also to our question today, where we ask, do you support the judiciary's proposal to remove the death penalty from our laws? Do you support the judiciary's proposal to remove the death penalty from our laws? You can share your views on this on X, TV47 News, and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. And yes, these are just among a raft of bills presented to the National Assembly, originating from the judiciary with various proposals. One of them is what we see on the front page of the Star today, bill seeking to a great extent to decriminalize sex work. And that's what's headlining on the front page of the Star today.
All right, from the Star to Business Daily. The big story there is Ruto eyes billions in Saudi Arabia carbon credit deals. And talking about Gulf state, a vital player in renewable energy market. As well, trip follows payment of first installment for credit fuel deal. There's matters in investment there. On the bottom strip, matters Forex. According to Thuge, the CBK governor, Kamau Thuge, saying Kenya paying the price for overvalued shilling. And they also have a graph there, shilling to exchange. And from that, the story is making it to Business Daily on the right side. KRME says Q1 revenue target by 79 billion shillings. Other stories, new vehicle sales plunge to lowest level since COVID-19. And Kenya taps 75 billion shillings at Trade Bank. Syndicated loan up there. A quote there by Sylvia Tenden. This is Matters Intelligence. Becoming a role model for sustainable industry will ultimately lead to benefits for all in the TIP supply chain. And a pull out there from a note taker to multiple boardroom figure on page 19. That is the front page of Business Daily.
Tuangazie gazeti la Taifa Leo. Taarifa kuu pale katika gazeti la Taifa Leo, ziara 38 ndani ya mwaka. Na Rais Ruto ameendeleza mtindo wa mtangulizi wake Rais mstaafu Uhuru Kenyatta za kufanya ziara nyingi katika nchi za nje zinazogharimu mamilioni ya fedha, huku akiwa kwenye ziara yake ya 38 kwa sasa. Na taarifa hii imeelezwa kwa upana katika ukurasa wa pili wa gazeti la Taifa Leo. Na ziara za Ruto tangu aingia mamlakani mwaka jana, ziara yake ya kwanza ikiwa ni Uingereza mnamo Septemba tarehe 18 mwezi wa 2022 alipoenda mazishi ya Malaika Elizabeth. Na kuanzia Januari mwaka huu hadi mwezi huu Daktari Ruto amefanya ziara 27 huku akizuru nchi zingine zaidi ya mara moja. Na ziara hivi punde ni Oktoba tarehe 14 aliyoifanya nchini China kuhudhuria mkutano kuhusu barabara na miundo msingi. Na ziara yake ya sasa nchini Saudi Arabia ni ya 38 ndani ya mwaka moja, huku naibu wake naye akiwa nchini Ubelgiji. Na tukiangazia pale juu katika Taifa Leo, MCAs Meru kumjadili Mwangaza, gavana atarajiwa kujitetea leo asubuhi bunge la kaunti ya Meru. Na katika masuala ya spoti, PSG waalika Milani kwa gozi kali UEFA. Na vigogo wa kocha Xavi wataingia uwanjani baada ya kupepeta Athletic Club. Tuangazie upande wa kushoto wa gazeti la Taifa Leo, ama ni wa kulia. Ubomoaji wa Mavoko wamalizika siku 11 baadaye. Ubomoaji katika ardhi ya EPCC Mavoko wakamilika. Taarifa hiyo iko katika ukurasa wa 3 wa Taifa Leo. Taarifa nyingine, Nyanza ya kumbuka siku ya mkosi. Hafla ya ufunguzi wa hospitali iligeuka ya ghasia na watu zaidi ya 50 wakauawa. Na hiyo ni taarifa ambayo iko katika ukurasa wa 5. Vile vile katika gazeti la Taifa Leo, PA yakataa kumezwa na chama cha UDA. Na chama cha Pamoja Africa Alliance cha Emerson Kingi chakataa kuingia UDA. Taarifa hiyo iko katika ukurasa wa 4 wa Taifa Leo. Na hizo ndizo habari kuu katika gazeti la Taifa Leo asubuhi hii.
Let's now cross the border and take a look at what's headlining in our neighboring countries. In Uganda, on the Daily Monitor, the big headline reads, Government to create Assistant Deputy Speaker slots. This is a proposal. The Justice and Constitutional Affairs Minister says they are mooting a plan to have Assistant Deputy House Speakers who would come in handy in the event that both the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of Parliament were unable to work for one reason or another. And this one is linked to that photo down there where Parliament is honouring Kemba. That's a Deputy Speaker of Parliament paying his last respects to former Minister Henry Chemba at Parliament yesterday. Members of Parliament eulogized the deceased as a distinguished politician and civil servants. This is what's headlining in Uganda today. Other stories given prominence on the front page are up there on the top strip. US turns the heat on Uganda business sector. And yes, you know, this love-hate relationship between the US and Uganda over LGBTQ laws. So US turns the heat on Uganda business sector. And those are the stories on the front page of the Daily Monitor. Big news in Uganda, Kampala this morning.
Retailing how much?
2,000 shillings Ugandan money.
And in Tanzania, about, how much is it? 1,000 Tanzanian shillings, 60 bob in Kenyan shillings now. Zigo la bima afya kwa wote kurejea bungeni, ndiyo taarifa kuu katika gazeti la Mwananchi. Wana takwimu pale 96,760. Hiki ni kiwango cha chini kilichopendekezwa kwa kaya kwa mwaka waliopo katika sekta isiyo rasmi kwenye kitita cha mafao ya huduma za msingi. Wanadokeza kuwa ni baada ya awali kukwama mara 3 kutokana na bunge kuibana serikali iweke wazi vyanzo vya fedha kulipia wasiojiweza. Yenyewe yasema mambo sasa yameiva, muswada kutua tena bungeni Novemba. Vidokezo vingine katika gazeti la Mwananchi ni kuwa Dorina tajwa mgao utajiri wa Mrema. Samia aitengea hekta 20 mizigo ya Zambia. Pale chini mchuano kurithi mikoba ya Zito, vigogo watajwa. Pale juu kicheko wavuvi kutumia simu kubaini maeneo walipo samaki. Haya ndio taarifa katika gazeti la Mwananchi.
Well, let's have a look at the Citizen in Tanzania. The headline there, Africa exports could hit 1 trillion shillings, $1 trillion by 2035, and Africa's exports could potentially hit almost $1 trillion in 2035, driven by the ongoing connectivity initiatives. This is according to new report. And in numbers there, exports from Africa, which currently stand at $645.3 billion, could rise to $952 billion by 2035 as links with South Asia, East Asia, and Middle East grow swiftly. Also, UNICTAD says 45 countries in Africa are considered to be commodity dependent, with commodities accounting for 90.1% of their exports. Still on the Citizen, Samia pledges a strengthened economic ties with Zambia, and also how satellite tech will boost fish catches. And finally on the Citizen, Mwinyi's quest for equitable development in Zanzibar. And that's what's headlining in Tanzania on the Citizen.
Right, back home in our matters in caricature this morning. For Daily Nation on page 17, was to take a look at what we were talking about yesterday at our 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. conversation on matters lands. A gentleman there with a pinstripe suit, looking sharp, wearing some shades there, smoking a cigar, probably a Turkish cigar there, holding a briefcase, Cartels and Grabbers Inc. Probably that's his company. And the gentleman there throwing dice on some title deeds. And goes to do with matters the land gamble. Who is really, is it the land buyer, or whoever is selling the land should be faulted here?
They seem to suggest that buying land in Kenya is a game of dice.
Yes.
That you just throw the die and you wait and see. Did you get it right, or you lost everything? It's a gamble, basically.
Probably Russian roulette.
Yes.
You're playing Russian roulette on buying land in Kenya.
Yes, you either live or die.
Oh, yes.
Well, the cartoon on the Standard today speaks about the cost of living, and with that apparent convergence of thought between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza. That's a handshake there. But the Kenyan, because this is the cartoon used to describe Wanjiku.
Yeah.
Wanjiku there is caught in between the clasp of hands, and it's squeezing her, the life out of her. And the commentator saying it's always more dangerous when they agree on something. Because, yes, when Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, when those two sides of the political divide agree on something, then Wanjiku suffers. And in this case, the cost of living is a pressure.
Oh, yes.
And that's a cartoon on the Standard today. Now,
on People Daily, page 10 as always. Let me see, page 10, there it is.
Well, let's look at what Stano has for us today. And pictured there, caricature of a police officer and then their citizens. And they say, officer, the problem seems to be pointing at your direction. Then the police there, there's also a chart showing a scorecard in fighting bandits. There's also another note there, police are busy fighting crime. Wow. Yeah, it's just a blame game when it comes to matters fighting banditry. These are the people, the police officers, who are just sitting in offices while they're expected to protect these people.
well, those are the dailies this morning. After the break, we'll be getting down to business, discussing state of the nation. Our panelists this morning, Honorable Maurice Bissau, MP Kiminini constituency, John Wangunyu, political analyst and development consultant, and Honorable Robert Alai, MCA Kileleshwa Ward. Do stand by for that. Remember our question today. Do you support the judiciary's proposal to remove the death penalty from our laws? Keep interacting with us on our social media pages, TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. You're watching Morning Buffet. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe. Now, the decision by the Chief Justice, Martha Koome, to amend 2 bills that will lead to the scrapping off of the life sentence has once again opened the debate on capital punishment against the reform structure. While some lawyers fault Koome for what they say is equal to giving capital offenders a slap on the wrist, a section of lawyers are of the opinion that the move, which would apply to all convicts sentenced to death as of November 21st, 2022, is a way to boost Kenya's human rights profile.
Prisoners who are charged with capital offences will have their charges limited to a sentence not exceeding 30 years if the 2 bills fronted by Chief Justice Martha Koome to Parliament will be approved. The proposal, which has divided legal minds in the country, was aimed at reforming the punishment to look humane and subscribing to international tenets of protection of right to life. Lawyer Gibson Gisore says this is a way of giving someone another chance of asking for forgiveness and probably placing Kenya into the map of countries that avoid death penalty when someone is charged with any serious offense.
There are people who are actually not represented and they've been accused of heinous crimes. So by chance or by mistake, you find that these people have actually gone inside. They could actually be not guilty. So if we go by that assumption, and we find that there are a couple of, in every 10 people, you find that there will be 2 or 3 who are, or either due to the ignorance of the law or being indigent people, they might have ended up to be taken inside or to be prosecuted and been found guilty.
The debate has been in the corridors of justice since the controversial case of Muruatetu back then in 1999. Lawyer Gibson Gisore argues that there is also a need of interrogating why someone wants to commit suicide, which the judiciary seeks to decriminalize attempted suicide that has been treated as a criminal offense for over the years now.
You know, their cases are reviewed from time to time, and then these names are forwarded to the committee. Normally it used to be the president who could just declare, maybe on a Mashujaa Day, declare that those people have served for over 50 years, or they who have served the longest for over 30 years, I set them free.
July 21st, 2023, President William Ruto reduced the death sentence for all capital offenders to a life sentence. In a Gazette notice published by Attorney General Justin Muturi, Ruto issued the directive following recommendations by the Advisory Committee on the Power of Mercy.
Once we interrogate the reasons why, we'll actually find that this person is psychologically affected.
Muturi also indicated that the directive would apply to all convicts sentenced to death as of November 21st, 2022. Under the current Kenyan law, which was drafted in the year 1930s, individuals found guilty of murder, robbery with violence, or treason can face the death penalty. The Chief Justice Martha Koome wants Parliament to approve a change to Section 112A of the Penal Code in subsection 4 that replaces the word manslaughter with the word second-degree murder. Paul Kirobi, TV47, Nairobi.
Now, the excess demand for the dollar and a tight dollar reserve is to blame for the nosedive of the shilling. This is according to CBK Governor Dr. Kamau Thuge, who says pushing up tourism will ensure the inflow of much-needed foreign exchange, which will over time boost the national currency and cement its stability.
Tonight, shock and outcry, especially from manufacturers, as the shilling finally crossed the 150 mark and the official rate finally caught up with the retail rates.
Some local manufacturers are picking up manufacturing here instead of importation.
While appearing before the Parliamentary Finance Committee, the head of the Apex Bank, Dr. Kamau Thuge, said sustained depreciation was as a result of several macroeconomic factors out of the control of the CBK.
The decline in others could be because of the exchange rate, and of course we would still want to support the intermediate imports, but the tariff structure is such that it favors the intermediate items and also the raw products.
He sustained that the exchange rate will be stabilized with increased tourism activities in the country and incentives meant to pique investor interest.
The governor cannot dictate what the exchange is going to be. But those interventions, hopefully, that we are oversighting on will lead to something. But
This as the CBK moves in on securing additional financing from the World Bank. A weak shilling means importers will be spending more in bringing in goods as raw materials for factories, thereby raising the cost of inputs for firms, which in turn pass the additional expenses to consumers. Hibak Said for TV47.
Now soon, 10% of the ugali you consume might be cassava infused, as a flour blending regulation requiring the incorporation of underutilized crops to fill the maize deficit is to be passed. Agriculture stakeholders now say production of the alternative for the country's staple per acre may be increased 5-fold if farmers are more open to genetically modified cassava.
Currently, cassava farmers in Kenya reap an average 14 tons of yield per acre per season, a shortfall from a potential 50 tons per acre if farmers partake in climate-smart agriculture and embrace the genetically modified variety of the tuber.
The yields are quite low in Kenya compared to some other regions.
Demand for the maize alternative is growing in popularity as the government fast-tracks the flour blending regulation, where a considerable percentage of the product will be infused with cassava.
The bigger issue for the regulation has been the data backup that will inform the 10% cassava blend, because that is the minimum requirement in that regulation. So where is the data to support the minimum percentage requirement of the cassava blend?
The Kenya Bureau of Standards is already formulating a measure of control to regulate the measurements to ensure it is fit for human consumption.
We have already done work also with KEBS because, for the regulation to come into place, you have to have other supporting document and procedures. So you cannot pass a regulation on flour blend without a standard to certify those products.
Already a number of private millers incorporate the alternative. However, it is a dismal 0.04% to 1% of the original maize blend.
Starting from government, if the counties where cassava is being produced are not selecting cassava as a priority value chain, it's going to be very difficult to push this.
Agriculture stakeholders are terming this as a salvation of the current depleted food basket, where maize produced per year stands at a little over 40 million bags, in comparison to the local need of approximately 65 million bags. As far as food security is concerned, the maize deficit in the country has been a cause for concern for the government. But now, with the milling of tubers, the government does realize that maybe there is a solution in the offing. Hibak Said for TV47.
Yes, you are still watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Indimuli. And the Honorable Maurice Bissau has just joined me on set. Good morning, karibu sana. Yes, we want to take a look at the state of the nation. A lot to talk about, but my attention has been drawn to issues of education, which at least both the Nation and the Standard, the Daily Nation and the Standard, have given prominence on their front pages. Matters to do with school fees. Bid to raise school fees on the front page of the Daily Nation, and varsity fees shocker on the front page of the Standard. Now, matters to do with education and the cost of living are high on the nation's agenda. When we see any attempt to raise school fees for a population that is already suppressed, already oppressed, already squeezed. If you look at the cartoon on I think it's on the Standard today, and it paints a picture of how the agreement between Kenya Kwanza and Azimio, and where it leaves Wanjiko, if I may use that expression. And the common mwananchi is rather squeezed under the clasp of this handshake between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza. High fuel prices, high taxation, now we see an increase in school fees. Where does that leave any Kenyan?
I think, good morning once again, Indimuli.
Good morning, karibu sana.
I think we can't take it anymore. Kenyans cannot take it anymore. As much as there's been some bipartisan discussions where it looks like most of these things are just like being sweeteners, when you find that what is being agreed is sort of boardroom agreement that does not reflect the reality on the ground, I think we can't take it anymore. Kenyans cannot take it anymore. Okay. And we as leaders, we're supposed to speak on behalf of the people elected as our employers. But as it is right now, talking about school fees, raising school fees, this is a no-go zone. Kenyans are really struggling. More burdens on the Kenyans, it's not acceptable.
Are you optimistic, given the fact that the National Dialogue Committee finally came to an agreement to canvass this issue of the cost of living as they continue deliberating on other issues? Because previously they had agreed on quite a number of other things that were on the agenda. This issue had not been agreed upon. Are you feeling optimistic now that they're going to be discussing it?
I am. I'm quite optimistic. But even as I said, as it's been discussed, let it not be the boardroom discussion that just sort of favors the bourgeoisies, you know, the higher ones in society. It has to be real issues that will address the common man, which again is the premise at which the current government came into on board. Majority who bought in were people, you know, down there at the pyramid. So again, yes, it's optimistic, they have to discuss it, but the focus should be on the Wanjiko, the Nekesa, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Allow me to welcome John Wangunyu, political analyst and development consultant, onto the panel. John, karibu sana, good morning. Just discussing with the Honorable Maurice Bissau this issue of, because the two big dailies in Kenya, the Daily Nation and the Standard, are talking about matters education. On the Standard, varsity fees shocker. Now every student will have to pay school fees to some extent, even those that had earlier been indicated as not being required to pay. And on the Daily Nation, bid to raise school fees. Parents have been warned to prepare to dig deeper into their pockets to keep their children in class from next term, with head teachers blaming the current high cost of living for pushing up prices and escalating overhead costs. Now, everyone else is going to increase their costs, and this burden is down to the common mwananchi, whose salary or income is not changing. The question is, to what point will the Kenyan be able to carry this burden? Because the manufacturers will increase their costs. The government has already raised its taxes. To what extent can the Kenyan, the common mwananchi, carry this burden?
Good morning, Fred. Good morning, my fellow panelists. And good morning to all our viewers. So this issue is very sort of very sensitive. Very sensitive in the sense that, of course, like you said, or you rightfully point out, that everything seems to be going up. So the cost of living generally, from food to all sorts of expenses. And the reason that is happening is, of course, because of something called inflation, which is the idea that prices are being adjusted upwards to reflect the reality of what is happening. So it basically means that schools have to do the same, because it costs money to run schools. You have to pay electricity. Electricity has gone up. You have to pay for water. Water has gone up. You have to pay for your teachers. You have to pay for food. We know that everything is expensive. And unfortunately, all that feeds into higher prices or higher costs of commodities and bills. So the question then becomes, what do we do? Because sometimes we say that in economics that it is not prudent to have what are called price controls. We used to do that back in the 80s. From history, we know that, or when you read economic history of Kenya, we know that we used to control prices in the 80s. But prudent macroeconomics and economic theory suggests that we no longer do that. You can no longer do that. It's unsustainable. We've already seen the problems we're having with the price of oil. Simply, it becomes untenable for you to have what are called price controls. So you let the market, what we call market fundamentals, to determine the cost of things. So once you've done that, then now the question becomes whether it is sustainable that your average Kenyan, or who we call Wanjiko, can actually afford the cost of these things. And we know that, of course, people are struggling, businesses are struggling, and everything is going up. Taxes are going up, and everything has an impact on our incomes, including disposable income. And therefore, that feeds back into this problem. And therefore, it becomes problematic. And I foresee a situation where we will end up with what economists call the inflation wage demand spiral. That as you increase the cost of commodities, then consumers will demand more in terms of income so that they can meet, and then where do you go from there? And it will keep rising. So I think the government has its work cut out for them. They need to pull up their socks if they have not, and they basically have to have their eyes on the ball, because it is going to be unsustainable. It is unsustainable.
Yes.
So something has to be done.
And listening to the CBK governor yesterday appearing before the Finance Committee of the National Assembly, which was probing the weakening of the shilling. And it would appear that even the central bank is blaming some type of intervention that they say has happened over the last 6 years for what is happening to the shilling. Because they say that the rapid depreciation of the shilling is a result of overvaluation that had the local currency remain artificially strong for at least 6 years. Now, this would point out to some sort of government intervention to try and stabilize the shilling, what they're calling artificial intervention. But to some extent, that is what Kenyans expect, that the government will come in and stop a free fall of the shilling. Are we saying that it is enough for the government just to tell us, well, everything is up to the market forces, nothing we can do, they just sit tight and wait?
Thank you, Ndimuli. First of all, just a step backward on the issue of the current taxations. I think let's live within our means, number one. Number two, taxation. There is no country in this globe that has sort of prospered through taxations. What we need to do is structural adjustment programs. An example, if we look at our budgets, travel budgets, our salary budgets, look at the civil service. And today, if you look at most of our civil service is actually aged. Why don't we do structural adjustment programs, come up even with some motivation like sort of early retirement package. You bring in a new active workforce, of course with slightly even lower salaries, because it will be like starting, but the more motivated, which actually captures majority of the population. So that's one. In terms of our, our human resource budget, we look into that. Travel budget. If you look at most of the executive offices, the budgets are pretty high. Why don't we look at that? There are some projects that could sort of be packed a bit, just to address the need, like saying, look, we're doing a Pareto analysis. We're saying these are the critical projects within category A. Then the ones maybe in C can be packed a bit. So that way we redirect the little or the limited resources into the right projects. Now, back on the issue of the central bank. I mean, this is a country where there are a lot of blame games. Thuge, the current central bank governor, has been close to a decade in the Ministry of Treasury. He was there. Most of the issues is the one who put them in place. So let's stop blame games. Let's try to get solutions. Another thing is every country is unique. No suit fits all. Your suit cannot fit me, cannot fit John here. This business of picking a World Bank template that has been applied, let's say in Serbia or in another country, and we get guys sitting around and think it will work in Kenya. No. We are a unique country. We've got our challenges in terms of population, in terms of our economic being, in terms of our livelihood. So we need to draw up a template that is based on reality. Instead of having a few economists sitting down in Nairobi without really going to Shinyalu, going to Kiminini, going to Muranga or even far and Lodwar, and coming up and saying, look, this is what we need to draw up for our country.
And interesting that you mentioned that the amount is spent on foreign travel is on the higher side. And I refer to the front page of Taifa Leo today, which talks about ziara 38 ndani ya mwaka mmoja for the president. The president has traveled to 38 countries, on average that about 3 countries for every month. And currently he's also outside the country, his deputy is also away. And one would expect that probably in a situation like ours currently, that there would be some measures of austerity that, as Mheshimiwa says, probably tighten our budgets a little bit, but we're not seeing that from the executive, are we?
No, it's a very, very curious situation that is going on at the moment, because actually myself, I was actually shocked yesterday going through the socials, and I'm seeing the president again. He's in Saudi Arabia, and just the other day he was in he has just jetted back into the country from China. So like Mheshimiwa is saying, it's all these things add up, and it's quite expensive, because when you can if you imagine that is an average of 4 trips every month. And of course, we know that they're trying to sort of reduce the number of people they travel with, their entourage, but still somehow it all adds up. Then the question becomes, given the circumstances that we are in, and given what is coming at us and Wanjiko in terms of life becoming more and more expensive, then the question is, how do we limit that? So in terms of, we know that there's been executive directives indicating that people should travel less. If it can be done via Zoom, let it be done by Zoom, and so on and so forth. So the reality is we need now to do the walking. We've done a lot of talking. Now we need to do the walking. In as much as I would want to see the president stay around for even a month without traveling. It would be interesting to see what he does in a normal sort of 1 month. He's just shuttling between Harambee Avenue and State House. It would be interesting.
Time for us to take a break, but we are not done with this conversation, because questions are to be asked about the role of Parliament in ensuring that the executive can actually stay within the meager means that we have as a country. That after the break. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV 47 with me, Fred Ndimuli, and I'm still in studio with just a moment. I'm trying to post this. And incidentally, are you on Twitter, John?
No, I'm not.
Okay. What about you, Mheshimiwa?
I am.
Oh, you are on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
At K Bissau.
At K Bissau. Yes.
Bissau with a single S.
Bissau with a single S. So yes, as we continue with this discussion, kindly, you can also tag in Maurice Bissau. You say at Bissau.
No, at K Bissau.
At K Bissau.
Bissau with a single S.
With a single S. And John Wangunyo, unfortunately, he's not on Twitter. And we continue with this conversation. And just before the break, we were looking at just how much we are spending.
Yes.
And the president and his deputy are currently on trips abroad. Yes, the extent of the problem we understand, just how much it's affecting Kenyans we do understand, yet we do have structures in place to check even government spending. One of them is the Houses of Parliament, the National Assembly, of which you are a member. And so much has been said about the conduct of this 13th Parliament. The fact that it has left the executive to its own devices, the executive can do anything without getting checked. What is the role of Parliament, if at all it cannot contain the excesses of the executive?
I think to say that the 13th Parliament has left the executive, I think it's a no or a yes. But again, look at the numbers. We're talking about the numbers. I mean, the post-election agreement. There was a lot of movement where we had more parliamentarians crossing over on the other side, meaning working together with the Kenya Kwanza. That, I think, has given a leeway. Like, there's some critical bills that have to sort of pass. So we're talking about, a government in place with majority of the member of parliament, who, when something comes, they just pass it on.
Are you admitting that the National Assembly is under the capture of the executive because of the numbers?
In a way, yes.
You are a member of that house.
It is, yes. But I can tell you, for some of us, and I speak for myself, I've always stood by what I know is benefiting Kenyans. Yes. But as it is right now, with the post-election agreement, where most parties sort of say they're working with the government, there's been a smooth flow of bills within the House. You find that majority are voting within, the whims of the executive.
Okay.
Yes.
John, yes. Such a house cannot be of any beneficial value to Kenyans. The fact that simply because the majority is on the government's side, that therefore the House of Parliament cannot think independently enough to check the excesses of the executive. Of what benefit would such a house be to Kenyans?
That would be sort of a very, very tricky situation that we are in the sense that, of course, like you're rightfully pointing out, that a majority of the legislators are from the ruling party. And we know that, of course, from party politics, the idea of competing under a certain particular political party is that you maximize or you optimize the number of seats you get in parliament so that you can push the agenda through. So the question then becomes for waheshimiwa that are not on the government side, what can they do? So for us as Kenyans, of course, we feel resigned to our fate, in the sense that we know that, unfortunately, the House being predominantly UDA, that hardly or Kenya Kwanza, because of the sort of the other parties within that coalition, will be able to affect government agenda that reflects the wishes of Wanjiko. That is going to be a tall order. So then the thing for me is that perhaps from the Azimio side, should make sure that actually they sort of keep sensitizing Kenyans about these issues and sort of fighting for Kenyans. It's not easy. It's not easy, he will tell you. That when you're outnumbered, sometimes it becomes very, very difficult. So for us as Kenyans, yes, unfortunately we find ourselves in what the proverbial rock and a hard place. That
okay, it is one thing supporting government agenda, but the high cost of living cannot be the government agenda. Of course, the government is supposed to try as much as possible to make life easier for Kenyans. The role of parliamentarians, even those that were elected through the Kenya Kwanza affiliate parties, cannot just be to support each and everything or defend the government even when something is going off.
Exactly.
And this issue of cost of living, which affects each and every member of this nation, definitely members of parliament must have a divergence of thoughts on this matter.
I have always said this in Dimoli, and I think it also matters background. What have you done before coming to parliament? And I've always told my colleagues to vote consciously, because we are there to represent the people. Today, if you went to the petrol station, there is no pump for Kenya Kwanza and Azimio. Mm-hmm. There is no unga on those shelves that is labeled, this is for Kenya Kwanza. It affects all of us. And for some of these laws, again, as we pass them, let's pass them for prosperity. Mm-hmm. Because going forward, you'd like to say, look, I was in that 13th parliament. I participated in this particular, passing this particular bill, and this was my stand. But again, urging the colleagues that whenever we legislating, we ensure that we legislate based on the fact that, look, how are Kenyans going to benefit? And for the future, how does the future hold us in our role as legislators? Again, and this is to all the legislators, whether in Kenya Kwanza or you're in Azimio, try to be very, very objective. Which sometimes in politics, as I see, there is what we call whipping. It's called the party position. You'll find that even as you push, or rather you pull a colleague from the other side and say, look, this is my position, say, yes, I agree, this is my position. But our party position, as we've been told, we just have to go with the flow. Okay. So which is, again, tricky. But again, my colleagues in Parliament, we must ensure that whatever we put in place must be for prosperity. We need to stand up whenever there are issues and say, look, and again, this problem is for all of us. Okay. So the cost of living issues, we need to really address them. And again, I've always said this, I might be on the opposition, but I'm Kenyan. And what I want is the good for the Kenyans. So there might be people in the opposition who can stand up and even tell the executive, tell the president the truth. But there are people who will be on the Kenya Kwanza side, and they'll not be open enough to tell the president the truth. So what am I saying? I'm saying is, let's pick all the views, let's accommodate. It might be by fate or by other arrangement that you find that you're probably on the opposition side, but you have the heart of Kenyans. So let's make it really open. Yes, bipartisan talk is there. But again, as I said, it is my belief that what has been discussed is for the benefit of the Kenyans. Okay. It should not be sort of a platform to bring a few bourgeoisies on the table to, you know.
The fact that we have that National Dialogue Committee points to a great extent failure of the National Assembly to play its role. Yes, in terms of legislation, it is okay to support policies and laws that the government has proposed through voting. But there's the other role of oversight, that when you see something wrong in the executive, you are required as a member of the National Assembly to raise your voice, to actually question what is happening. Yes, we'll support you in any policy that you want passed as a government and we'll vote for it, but we are allowed to question it. How come this National Assembly, and I'm not talking even about the minority side. The minority across the board. Across the board. Yeah. How come the voices are more in agreement even when things are going wrong with it? Even when
No, the question. Yes. Sorry. Because I sit there, I'm the sure, I know where it pinches most. It's not that they've not been questioning, but the issue is, I don't know if it's cultural or what, when you tend to be on one part, you think even if the wrongs are being done, you go quiet with them. You cannot question. You cannot question. But I can tell you there are colleagues, you know, courageous colleagues who've been questioning these things. They are there. There are a few also, I could name a few, who also being still on the Kenya Kwanza side, they've always questioned this issue. And again, the issue of bipartisan, it's not that the parliament had failed. It was, the animosity was very high. Within parliament, there was a lot of issues even to do with fracas in discipline. Until now, this bipartisan came back. Now you can see at least people can have sober conversation. Okay. So the bipartisan in itself has helped to bring down the temperatures. Because at some point, I can tell you, even bottles would fly, you know, on the floor.
Yes, it's very true. The thing is this, that we have a problem, a very, very serious problem. And I like what Mheshimiwa is saying, and I would like to reinforce that, and of course sort of challenge him, that one of the things that is giving us real headache is our debt, what is called the national debt. The national debt is humongous. It's huge. It's running around 10 trillion now. 10 trillion. So basically what is happening is, just like on a micro level, if you mismanage your finances, you'll get to a point where KCB and all these other banks and everybody else will deem you to be uncreditworthy, and then that will be reflected in the cost of loans that they will give you. And that is the elephant in the room. So I wish Parliament, Mheshimiwa, this is a challenge I'm throwing at you, that you and your colleagues start doing a thorough audits and asking questions around the national debt. Because the truth of the matter is, You look at the numbers that are coming out of National Treasury. They are quite scary that the amount of money we are raising, we are spending almost 70% or 80% to pay for debt. So then the question becomes, how sustainable is that? Of course it is not, because it will get to a point where we will now be using all our money to pay debt. So the question becomes, or the starting point would be, can we question that debt so that we give the executive the power to, in this traveling that the president is doing, and we know that he's sort of having cordial relations with IMF and the World Bank, is to start sort of negotiating how we either pay for those debts, or we do what Zambia has done, or Ghana, which is to renegotiate and say that unfortunately the amount of debt we are paying is affecting our ability to meet our commitment to social services, for example. Because the moment, like I said, you're paying 70% of your income to sort out debt, unfortunately you're on what is called a treadmill. Then it becomes difficult for you, you know, when you accelerate that treadmill in the gym, and then you put the speed goes all the way up, and then all of a sudden you're in this situation where do you jump off the treadmill, or what happens? And that is basically where we are at. So we are simply running so fast to remain walking.
And the situation,
yes.
I think the Kenyan understands just how dire the situation is.
Yes.
Because every Kenyan is feeling it directly.
Yep.
And everyone is wondering, how come, even in terms of perception, this government doesn't appear to be slowing down, as you say, in the way they are spending. If you encounter the president's convoy today driving through any part of Kenya, it is a huge convoy. Recently we had the National Day, Mashujaa Day in Kericho, and the whole government was there. A huge part of the government was there for a week in the run-up to the launch of the UHC. And that does come at an expense. In a situation where the cost of living is skyrocketing, where the shilling is depreciating every single day, don't you think that probably even in just perception, that probably the government would change a few things? I would like to use the example of what happened in the Kibaki administration.
Yeah.
Where there was a directive that all senior government officers now abandon their SUVs and start driving smaller saloon cars. Well, the success of that we cannot discuss now, but at least in as far as the perception is concerned, Kenyans felt, yes, something is happening.
I agree with you, but before I get to that, there was the issue of the debt ceiling. When this came into increase within Parliament, again, the issue of numbers, there were more people voting for it. In fact, as much as we argued that, look, it's not sustainable. We cannot be taking debts where, you know, our great-great-grandchildren will be the ones paying them. But that was passed because of the numbers. Two, when it comes to renegotiating debts because of the burden we are having now, to me, if you look at Kenya strategically and the impact we are having economically, one, we are hosting refugees. We're hosting most of the militaries that are around, you know, doing surveillance. We've got the British here. We've got even the Americans within our shores. We can already look into this and say, look, the impact we are having, the environmental impact even from refugees, and we're talking to the World Bank. We're holding a lot of refugees here. We're holding a lot of militaries. What am I saying? It's not just renegotiating on the debts. We should be focused to even ask some of these debts to be written off. And we've got very good reasons. The burdens we have as Kenyans, trying to balance the economics, the security of the entire region, we can use that to negotiate. The other critical thing is the consistency. If today we are jumping between the West and the East, we will not be taken seriously. We need to focus, we see who is our more strategic partner, who can bring in more. But today, if we are oscillating between today we're with Uncle Sam, that's the Americans, tomorrow we're moving again with the European Union, the next thing we're in China, we're not taken seriously. We need to decide who is a real strategic true partner, so that when we talk about these infrastructural projects, we're talking about loans, and they have to be fair loans. Again, that is what we need to do. Now, on the issue of austerity measures, and here I normally talk about walking the talk. Yes, we need to demonstrate that really we are a struggling country. Because an example, if you've gone to negotiate with the Chinese, an example, or you've gone to the capital of the European capital in Brussels, you're going to renegotiate alone. And here you are, you're arriving with a, a pack of about 200, 300 people. You'll not be taken serious. Why don't we have, say, look, 20 people max? Because as head of state, we need to move, we need to have security, we need to have private secretary. But if we arrive with a number of 200, 300 people, those donors will not take us seriously. So we need to repackage it. But again, even locally, how are we moving? And it's not just at the national executive. Even in the county executive, look at the way governors are moving around. A governor moves around with 50 vehicles. For what? All those guzzlers, those big vehicles. So we need to really demonstrate. We've seen countries, we've seen even at the United Nations, where there is a cycling week, an example. You go to work cycling. You're cutting down not just the carbon emission, but you're also looking at, cutting down cost, in terms of the fuel and, So we need to really demonstrate these things. I know it will be far-reached if I say that maybe an executive should catch a bus, but it's happening. You, in a place like Switzerland, you're told that is the president of that state.
Riding on a bus.
Riding on a bus.
Yes.
So, you demonstrate so that even the people can really feel that, look, this is, there's good intentions to actually, they feel us, the executive is feeling us on the issues we're going through. Yes.
But John, and I will still stay on with the role of Parliament.
Yes.
Because, and I'm not just talking about the 13th Parliament, successive parliaments should be directly to blame for all these policies. They are the ones who pass all the finance bills in every year, including this year. Whether minority side or majority side, they are the representatives of the people. Yeah. They pass this. When even coming to support or criticize or oversight the government, it is their job. Yes. When they decide to abdicate on that role of oversight and become quiet, we can therefore say that probably the role of the National Assembly over the years, and not just the 13th Parliament, is dwindling. That probably the Houses of Parliament are no longer serving the purpose they were intended.
Yes, the truth of the matter is this, that especially the 12th Parliament, the 12th Parliament, I don't know whether Mheshimiwa, were you sitting in the 12th Parliament? The 12th Parliament really let us down, really let Kenya down, in the sense that, remember, for me, it all starts and ends with the debt. The reason I'm saying that is, of course, for what I've explained, that we are in this situation where we're spending almost all our money on paying debt. So we're on that debt treadmill that is proving difficult to come off. And the reason I'm saying that is this, that for context purposes, we know that at the time of Moi leaving in 2002, our national debt was 600 billion. Kibaki came, added 1.2 onto the debt. So by the time he was leaving, he left us with about 1.8, just under 2 trillion shillings. And then in the 10 years of Jubilee, from 2013 to 2022 last year, our debt jumped 500% from that under 2 trillion to under 10 trillion shillings. And that's a humongous jump in 10 years. That is basically saying almost every year we were accumulating a debt of 800 billion. That is unsustainable. And that is part of the failings of that particular house. Because remember, when you find yourself in an economic mess, you don't just wake up one morning and realize, oh, my finances are in a mess. It's something that the build-up will always sort of, when you look retroactively, you'll notice that there are places where I made mistakes, and that's why I'm in the situation that I am. So yes, it is true that Parliament needs to do more. We know that now we are in this situation. It's not just enough to say, to blame Parliament, but we know that it's only 1 year. They have another 4 years thereabouts for the term to go. So we would want, as Kenyans, to see them do more in terms of questioning government expenditures, questioning government plans, and so on and so forth. Because at the moment, of course, we know that the next cycle, budget cycle has started. So for the 24-25 budget making process has started. So we would want to see our members of parliament doing more in terms of questioning what government is doing and actually sort of rearranging those numbers so that they make sense, so that we don't end up in this situation that we are in, regardless of the fact that we know that they have been disappointing in some areas. So they need to do more. And the issue of the debt, because it's within the ambit of the parliament, that they should be doing more in terms of questioning so that we have even conversations around who is responsible for that debt. So some of the debt, actually, we should make the argument that it was taken under duress, or what is a concept called odious debt, which simply means that it is unfair to load that loan on Wanjiko, and yet most of that money we know was wasted or stolen. So the Parliament has the power to do that. If they can come together, like Mheshimiwa is saying, regardless of which side of the divide you're on, then push the agenda of Wanjiko, because at the end of the day, this issue will keep sort of dragging us back. Whatever we do, it will always. And
you'll have to forgive me for staying on with Parliament, because the issue of representation and the cost of representation in this country is also one of those issues that needs to be looked at. Currently, we have about 345 members of the National Assembly. If you combine with the Senate, it gets to 400. If you go to the County Assembly, it keeps just ballooning. And if at all these houses will not play the rightful role they're playing, then this is a cost that is unnecessary to the Mwananchi. It is among those things being discussed at by the National Dialogue Committee, and on the issue of NGCDF, which is not even on the law, in the law. And the Supreme Court has already pronounced itself on this matter. It is one of those things that we are certain will pass because of the interests of the members of the National Assembly, especially those who represent single constituencies. We are seeing the same mirroring at the ward level. Because now MCAs are demanding the equivalent of a CDF, the Ward Development Fund. And we're seeing that also becoming a problem at the county level, even with the squabbles between the county assemblies and the respective governors. Don't you think that we're missing the point, especially when it comes to representation, that those people we've elected to represent us, oversight, legislate, and represent, are keen on doing the work of the executive in terms of development?
Okay, let me start with the issue of Parliament and the numbers that have dwindled, whereby you find that very few are changing the executive. I think with the bipartisan, there is an element of what we call fidelity to parties, where you're not poached to go on the other side, and then you don't sort of take the party position, or you not think independently because of some undue influence. So I think that will address, whereby if a position has been taken about cost of living, and you're on a certain divide, like let's say Azimio, we need to take that position. Of course, in a way, it hampers one's thinking. But again, if that is the position that has been taken to address the cost of living, then that should be. So on the other issue, as much as we say that there is overrepresentation, and Indimuli will agree with me, and John too, that our society is a society that is quite unfair. And some of the issues that we're addressing this issue of proper representation is to have a representative even closer to you. Because you realize in the old system where we had like the entire Western Kenya, you know, the Kavirondo, where you're having like Masinde Murilo representing that side, you had Ngala representing the coast. The representation was not very effective. This can be effective for as long as the people also pick the right leaders to go and represent them. I'll give you an example. Today, if you go even in your constituency or in your county, you're from Kakamega, I guess?
Yes.
The most visible projects are from CDF. Despite the billions that go to the county, the most visible, the projects you can see, that can be felt in terms of bursaries, in terms of school infrastructure, is from CDF. Now, the ward specific, which the MCAs are asking for, is also to their advantage. Ask me why. Today, most of the MCAs are at the mercy of the governors. But once they know that an example will have this 20 million, and that money is still from the kit that already the governor has, they'll be independent. They can also be independent, not to go in the assembly and vote, you know, by the thinking of the governor, but to be independent and say, look, within my ward, I've got this kit and I'll operate with it. That is the problems we are having today. When you sit down with MCAs, they tell you, look, we have to sort of work with the governor as much as we don't agree because we are at his mercy.
But isn't that a direct result of a lack of understanding of the provisions of the Constitution? Your role does not include any development projects. You're supposed to be oversighting the same. You're supposed to be representing your people and legislating inside the Houses of Parliament.
Government alone cannot develop. I mean, national government alone cannot reach. And in fact, you know this, that when you leave it to the national government alone and you say you're doing oversight, it tends to be like today. Look at most development. Most development are more on the mountain and part of Rift Valley because they've had an advantage to have the president and deputy president from this particular region. So minus the CDF, that is why until CDF came in devolution, that's why you could find a tarmac in Mandera. So the issue of saying that development is purely a national government issue, then some other Kenyans, other part of Kenya, will be disadvantaged. So to cascade down the CDF to specifics, so that also a member of parliament, and in this case also the MCAs, that's why we're saying they should also get a ward fund, it makes a lot of sense. You know, trickle down, so that at least every leader, as much as you're doing, in fact, it improves your oversight, your oversight role, so that you're not sort of called on the side and being given a few sort of, you know, motivations, some sweeteners to say, look, we'll be bringing this project on your side, so please don't oppose this. So it actually improves the legislature. It gives you that independence.
Okay. John, whatever our Constitution provides for does not include the role of executing developments at the constituency level for a member of the National Assembly or the Senate or a member of the County Assembly. Their roles are clear: oversight, representation, and legislation. This could partly be blamed on the level of understanding of the common mwananchi on the provisions of the law. Is that the conversation we should be having? That if at all mwananchi then wants a greater role for the member of the National Assembly, then we should change it and broaden it so that then we can question this member of parliament on development matters and not just on oversight, legislation and representation.
Of course, it will have to sort of reflect that, because there is a valid argument to be made or a valid conversation to be had about the imbalance in how development is delivered across the country. And like he rightfully says, Mheshimiwa says, that you have a situation where for many, many years, some parts of the country felt that they've been marginalized. And therefore, there is that valid conversation about how do we deliver development to those people who are deemed not to be part and parcel of the presidency, because that's a reality of how our politics and our economics has been conducted over many, many years since independence. So that's a valid argument. Then but the question now becomes, how do we best do it so that we safeguard the parliament's role in terms of acting as a counterbalance to the executive, so that you don't end up with the problems that we are seeing of people basically being bribed, parliamentarians being bribed to support the government agenda without asking questions. So it is true that the law provides for two functions, for, is it two or three? That they oversight, they do legislation, and the last one, and representation. So that is the role of Parliament. And the idea is that from political theory, that they act as a counterbalance to the other two arms of government, so that you have this sort of functioning system that enables everybody to be on their toes and do their job. So that is the theory. But the truth is, or in practical terms, you go to some areas, just because you've been outside, you've been part of the opposition or outside the ruling coalition, then you're denied development. But now we have what are called the county governments. And the county governments, if you follow the conversation or the debates that were had around creating the two-tier system of government, was to exactly deal with that problem. That how does Kakamega County develop itself without necessarily being in government. And I think those conversations are even going up to today, where you've had the Azimio leader saying or asking of building classrooms and public facilities. So how do we integrate that so that they do not become useless, or they do not perform the function that they are currently doing? So is it possible to subsume NGCDF under the county governments? But then the other question becomes now political. What does it mean for Mheshimiwa here? Because at the end of the day, as much as we want to sort of concentrate on the theory, the practical or the practicalities of life, as Mheshimiwa will tell you, when his people see him, they see development, basically. So when he gets...
should that be seen as a deficiency on the part of our constitution? That the expectation by the electorate is that the MCA will conduct and execute development projects. The expectation on the member of the National Assembly is that you will come and build schools and disburse bursaries. Yet that is not the role prescribed by the Constitution.
It is not, but when we're talking about devolution, really trickling down the issue that MCA, if he handles it at that ward level, then it's sort of like a buffer before getting even to the MP or to the governor. Number two, in Dimuli, I know you can't believe this. In my own constituency, Kiminini, whoever I replaced was in the opposition. There is no single national government project. As we speak today.
He had access to NGCDF.
But apart from the NCGDF, I mean the roads, there is no single tarmac road. Now we negotiating, but as we negotiate, I negotiate in the pool of other parliamentarians within the region. I'll not go solo, but we negotiate. An example, a road that comes in from Lukuyani, Lugari, passes through Kiminini, going into Saboti then and the base. So bringing all these parliamentarians together and saying, look, if you go on the Cherangani side, you'll find that there are roads where even goats are sleeping on the roads. But if you come on the Kiminini side, no single tarmac, not even a kilometer of tarmac. Why? Because whoever was there, whoever I replaced was in the opposition. So apart from this, those CDF projects you see, there's nothing else. So these are the things we're talking about. Now assume there was no CDF. What would have happened there? These classrooms, the challenges we are having on sanitation, the poor kids, you know, I mean, in the bursaries. What would really happen?
And hence my question, because now we're looking at the possibility of a constitution review, adjusting one or two things in the Constitution 2010. And therefore I'm asking, is it time that we make it official and broaden the role of the member of the National Assembly, so that we can also question you in your performance, not just on legislation, oversight and representation, but also in as far as development projects are concerned?
I mean, that is fine, and it's been discussed. Like, if you look at the bipartisan talk, the issue of the CDF being now included, you know, because they've been back and forth within the courts, for it also to be included within the Constitution. That is part of what is on the table. Yes.
Because the issue is, unless it is provided for in the law, who will oversight the performance of the member of the National Assembly in executing the NGCDF? Because the mechanisms for oversight are supposed to be with him.
And by the way, the member of parliament does not execute the CDF. He actually plays the oversight role. There is a board that is set by the CDF. It's appointed. And also schools, an example, they've called what we call project committees. So the funds are disbursed. The role of the member of parliament is actually oversight. For the CDF is not implemented.
Even in as far as influencing how the money is spent?
Yes, theoretically, yes, he's correct. That, yes, it is true that the Member of Parliament provides oversight and sort of watchdog over what, but we know the reality. There's the sort of the theory and the practical side of things that the truth of the matter is that one of the reasons that this issue is being actually discussed under the bipartisan Nini is because it was deemed to be unconstitutional. Yes. That there is no way Parliament having its well-defined roles within the Constitution and then all of a sudden now performing executive functions. So how do we deal with that problem? And that is why it's on the table at the bipartisan talks. But now, for me, I would want us to be in a situation where, because we know that in truth, this particular NGCDF performs a very, very sort of critical function. Mheshimiwa will tell you that I believe that in his rural home, he's always receiving delegations, all sorts of people coming to him with cries about fees, about schools, about roads, about anything and everything, water and so on and so forth. So how do we ensure that this is NGCDF, because if you look at the practical sort of interpretation or the practical application of NGCDF has actually had a positive, throughout the years since it was introduced back in the days of Kibaki, has had a positive impact on rural communities particularly. So how do we remove that problem of the MP influencing how the NGCDF works? And that is where now the conversation should be. That how do we make sure that this thing that is functioning well, because that's the truth, NGCDF has made positive impact in many, many communities. How do we now avoid the problem of the Member of Parliament, as much as we know he is removed, he or she provides only oversight, that he does not feel it. I remember in previous years there was the argument that the at that time the CDF would be loaded up with the cronies of the Member of Parliament and so on and so forth. So you would end up with this particular problem where basically it was like his slush fund or her slush fund that he uses to bribe constituents. So if you need vizuri in a certain area or in his sort of local area, he will make sure he builds schools there and so on and so forth. But if you're on the other side that is deemed to be from Fred's side, who is my opposition.
Isn't that the reality even now? That you lose.
It's not as pronounced.
Which part of the constituency?
It's not as pronounced as it was.
No, there is what we call public participation.
Yes.
Before the new funds come in, like for 2023-2024, there is a public participation where all the constituents come together and say, these are our priorities. Yeah. Then you look at an example, I've got 151 million in Kiminini constituency. Then we look at, from this amount, how much is going into bursaries? For the schools, which ones have more priority in terms of, there might be one that has already an existing laboratory, there's one that might not have. And then you look at the distribution in terms of wards. Like this ward have to, like, let's say 2 laboratories, the other one doesn't have. So priority you give it to the one that doesn't have. So that sometimes even, you know, students from the other schools can take advantage. So public participation is how the projects are determined. It's not the MP to wake up and say, peleka huko, rudisha huko. No, there is public participation. Bursary is the same thing. Like what I did on my side, on the bursaries is to call in, including the village elders, so that the village elders can say, yes, this kid is from a family that is not able, and it's a kid of so-and-so, to also avoid issues whereby you're getting children from rich homes picking up the bursaries. So public participation is what determines the distribution of this funding and the projects that are going to be implemented in a given year.
Are these structures standardized across all constituencies? Because you cannot question anything that is not standardized.
That is now to sort of reinforce what Mheshimiwa is saying, that the conversation should now be about how do we create sort of SOPs for how CDF.
Standard operating procedures. We need SOPs
so that we remove all those issues that we are saying. So that perhaps will help take the conversation forward, that as long as it's standardized, then we remove all those problems we're talking about, that Mheshimiwa does not favor his sort of locality at the expense of who was opposing him from the other side of the vote.
But if you do, you lose the vote.
Yes, and it is true there is public participation, then we should reinforce that idea of public participation, and at the same time also sort of some civic education, so that even when your constituents come to engage in PP, that they know what they are engaging about. But it's quite a broad conversation, because I think it involves the local administration, it involves the churches, it involves the elders, nyumba kumi, and so on and so forth. But reinforce that so that it becomes the standard that is applied across the 290 constituencies, so that Mheshimiwa he's not the only one who is doing it in Kiminini, while Fred in another constituency is doing his own things.
The conversation we're having has to some extent, and we mentioned the fact that this debate has moved to the ward level. And Today, Meru Governor Kawira Mwangaza will be appearing before the Meru County Assembly to defend herself on those allegations of impeachment. She has the MCAs have made 7 allegations, and most of them are about her conduct, failure to include people in decision making, gross violation of the Constitution, gross misconduct and abuse of office. What they're not telling us is that this is the second time they're trying to impeach her. The genesis of this issue was the fact that when she became governor, she disagreed with the members of the county assembly on that ward fund. The money they were demanding, she told them, it is not in the Constitution, I cannot give you this money. And from then on, their relationship was severed. Of course, it has degenerated into so many other issues. The fact that this is not in law is resulting in the kind of squabbles we are seeing. Of course, there are issues between the governor and the deputy governor, and that is across all counties. Some of the relative calm we're seeing across counties can be attributed to the fact that some of the governors have given in and actually ensured that their MCAs are accessing funds for this Ward Development Fund. Are you seeing the crisis that this kind of debate has already created with devolution?
In leadership, there has to be emotional intelligence. There has to be people skills. The Constitution is there, but how do you apply it also for the public good? An example, just like the governor, the people who voted for the MCA, the people who voted for the member of parliament and other leaders are the same people who voted for the governor and to the president. What will be wrong for the governor to sit down with those MCAs? An example, I know the most of bone of contention, an example, you're fixing a dip, cattle dip. That is within the ward. The MCA is the boss there. He's the one elected there, he knows, those are his voters. Why, as a governor, would you bring in the dip, that you're coming to pour there and opening the dip? Why don't you work with the MCA? Because it's also giving him mileage. Because by the end of the day, where these guys are saying, look, we're not being involved. Because by the end of it all, and we're talking of how many? 3 years? About 1,200 days? Those MCAs will be asked, what did you do here? Because the dip was opened by, they saw only the governor. It's threatening their survival. And in nature, human beings, they're also threatened when it comes to, stepping into their territory. So what we are saying is people skills, emotional intelligence, involve this MCA. It might not be in the Constitution, but when you're fixing that particular toilet block within a market center, where the MCAs actually, that is even a polling station, why don't you sort of involve them? You're doing a market, an exam, why don't you involve them? Now, it might not be in the Constitution, but it takes even a simple meeting.
Isn't that tantamount to bribery?
No, it's not. It's not bribery. It's working. It's teamwork. It is teamwork. We've seen situations where governors go even to, not just to wards, and they leave out the MCAs, and they've decided the projects they're doing. There's supposed to be some teamwork. And you talked about where you're seeing calmness. It's because everybody is being involved. Everybody's on the high table. We're saying we're going to launch an ECD. The MCA involved. We're going to launch a DIB. The MCA is involved. In Dimuli, it's about teamwork.
But John,
it's just about teamwork.
The end result is that now some of the MCAs in the relatively calm counties have been given this fund in exchange for going lenient to the governors. Don't you see a problem in that? That yes, I'll give you this money. Then in exchange, you do this in the house. Then when my bills come, you just pass them without
without questioning. It's politics is about interest. But I'll come back to that. Just on Kawira Mwangaza, I don't know whether she's going to be the new that former governor of Embu. How many times was he impeached?
Wambora. It was twice.
It was twice. Yes. So it seems, I don't know whether she's going to survive this time round. But the truth of the matter is this, that when when the electorate or members of the public elect, say, person X, they straight away associate with him or her in terms of the practical side of things, which is development. Precisely. So how do you deliver development, and yet you're not in control of the sort of the distribution of the money? We know that in theory, the budget is brought to the county assembly, and then they debate, and then it is passed. But we also know the caliber of some of these MCAs. Perhaps some of them do not largely understand what is going on. But at the end of the day, how do we deliver development so that when we come back in 5 years' time, people will say, this member of county assembly actually built for us, because that is how people interpret it, that he built for us a school, he built for us a toilet, he made sure Maram has been put on a certain road, and so on and so forth. So how do you do that, and at the same time, you as the governor ensure that this development is distributed, using quote marks, development is distributed in such a way that you engender that and cultivate that idea of teamwork. And like Mheshimiwa is rightfully saying, is that governors should work with their MCAs. And to work with MCAs, it means creating synergies so that as much as the MCA is gaining mileage, I'm also gaining through that. Because at the end of the day, even winning votes and campaigning and so on and so forth is teamwork. And at the end of the day, how do we deliver political interests that are mine as the governor and you as my MCA? So we have to work together.
Is it all about political interests? Because the justification from both of you is that, yes, even the MCAs need to gain mileage.
Yes.
The governor needs to gain mileage.
Yes.
The member of the National Assembly needs to gain mileage.
Yep.
Is that the only justification of why we should be devolving this monies to the constituency and the world level for political purposes only?
It's not for political purposes. You know, the will, if I'm trying to get the right words, it becomes easy when they usually say one hand cannot clap. It becomes easy when there's that teamwork, this synergy. You know, you use less effort as a governor, even the buying. Because remember, even that MCA at that local level, that is the king of that place. And probably that same MCA even influenced some of the votes you got. And it becomes easier if you work with that person, not necessarily giving the fund, but just telling him, look, picking even up the call and saying, come, let's talk, let's have a conversation. Mm-hmm. You know, it really, you know, clears the way, it makes it creates that synergy. That's what we're talking about. But if you're operating as a lone ranger, believe me, there'll be moments and moments of this type of cases of impeachment. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just like, it's like a football game. Mm-hmm. You cannot be wanting to strike, forgetting that there is a midfielder. And in fact, if you look at it from that perspective, the MCA is like the defender. Mm-hmm. That is your guy at the ward level. At
the ward level, true.
You know, and that's why
you have to keep him up.
You have to keep him. Take an example, and the approach. I think the best example is Excellency the President. He plays his politics from the ward level. Mm. He knows most of these MCAs.
Isn't he using the same bait on the National Assembly, that ensuring, with his promise that I'll ensure you get an GCDF? It was one of his promises, and he made it publicly. He said, for members of the National Assembly, I will ensure that you get this NGCDF, despite what the Supreme Court said. And now the same National Assembly faces accusation and criticism of being under the capture of the executive.
But unfortunately, that is how politics works. I do consulting work in the development space, and there is no question about the efficacy and the ability of these funds delivering, because it is true, evidence exists that they've made positive change to people's lives in terms of building the first tarmac in some of these counties. I remember I've seen positive stories about some county hospitals, level 5, being able to do the first sort of surgery, baby delivery through cesarean section. So for us in urban sort of counties like Nairobi, some of these things we take for granted, but if you went to Mandera and you hear the sort of these positive stories coming out of CDF and what Waheshimiwa have been able to do, then it reinforces the idea of teamwork. And that is how politics works. It's teamwork, like he said. You've got the goalkeeper, you've got your defenders, the midfielders, and then the guys striking up front. Insofar as that team works together, that is how you're going to score goals. If you do not, if the defenders don't do their job, unfortunately, you're going to ship in goals and you're going to be defeated. So unfortunately, that's how politics works, what we call real politics, the truth. That in theory, it is true, we would want to sit here and imagine that MPs do oversight representation and it stops there, and then the executive delivers projects. But unfortunately, Wanjiko on the ground wants to associate his or her member of parliament with, or the MCA with, some project that is tangible. That we never used to have enough classrooms in school X. Now we have an extra classroom. There were no toilets and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that's how politics works.
And again, in the
time is up, so I'll ask you to give your final comments, even as you continue contributing to the same.
Okay. Devolution, it's there. The billions being taken to counties, but the most visible, the most projects that have touched people in terms of school infrastructure, in terms of school fees, uplifting the poor kids from poor homes, it's the CDF. Now, it can even get better if we ensure that within the Constitution, we also include the ward fund, so that the MCA also, within that unit of the ward, can also be effective. And again, the national government alone cannot sort of spread or cascade that development down to the people without these structures that are there. So what is critical? We embed them in our constitution, the CDA and the NGCDF, then also the ward fund to come there. And most critical, again, even where I sit, the governors, the president, there has to be that teamwork from the MCA to the top, because all of us were elected by these people. The issue you're seeing with Mwangaza and many other governors is because of a lack of that teamwork. And lastly, on the issue of our economy, the state of the nation, structural adjustment programs are very, very important. I talked about the human resource budget. It's critical. I mean, it's pretty high. Let's rethink of retiring the ones that are already there, because they've been there over time, their salaries are very high. Bring in most of these young graduates, who are the majority. They're out here to start at a new slate. They're also new brims. They will sweep better. Cut down on the foreign trips. Cut down, in fact, suspend some of the projects that are not critical. Look at the priority projects now. Which ones are they? Okay. The ones that are life-saving, an example, or the ones that are really critical to jumpstart our economy. Today, the Kenya shilling is gone down because we are not supplying. We're just a consumer country. So we need to see how we can work out and also start supplying so that this can improve. And again, lastly, we don't want excuses. Tuge was there in the treasury before, is now the central bank boss. He needs to give us solutions. And lastly, for the economists that are advising HE, His Excellency the President, they should not pick World Bank templates from other countries and they just fill it in. Let's do it practically based on the Kenyan situation.
Okay, thank you. John?
We are in a difficult situation. It is no longer a question of whether this is true or real, but the reality of, for the people, for the common mwananchi, is that they are struggling. Something needs to be done. The question then becomes, what is this that needs to be done? So it will include things to do with austerity, that perhaps we need to put a cap on the foreign travel particularly. I don't really have a problem with local travel, because that's how you help certain economies grow. So in terms of local travel, if we can reallocate funding from foreign travel to local travel, then that would be one of the starting points. But austerity is a must, number one. Number two, I would want to see the conversation around the debt becoming more participatory across all the levels, not just within the executive and the legislature, but within us as a public, because that is where our problems lie. That as long as we're spending all this money paying debt, we're going to be having problems. So once we've done that, then lastly, that we need to do more, and especially from the legislature point of view, that please let's have our members of parliament doing more in terms of oversighting what government is doing. And now that the process of the new budget has commenced, let us see Parliament doing more in terms of reallocating resources and taking them towards development so that we have those drivers of economic growth actually delivering. So that is what needs to be done.
John Wangunyu, development consultant and political analyst. Honorable Maurice Bissau, MP Kiminini, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being our panelists this morning on State of the Nation as we take a look at what's affecting Kenya. Gentlemen, you'll allow me to go through this editorial comment as we come to the end of our session this morning. Now, Kenya's progressive move towards abolishing the death penalty. The proposed bill seeking to abolish the death penalty in Kenya and replace it with a maximum sentence of 30 years in jail is indeed a commendable and welcome step towards aligning the country with its progressive constitutional values. It represents a significant departure from the archaic laws introduced during the colonial era and reaffirms Kenya's commitment to upholding fundamental human rights. Kenya takes pride in having one of the most progressive constitutions ever written, which recognizes a sacrosanct right to life. The retention of the death penalty in the penal code has long been inconsistent with its commitment to human rights. The current laws that mandate the death penalty were drafted by Britain in the 1930s, and it is high time for Kenya to shed these leftovers of the past and embrace a more humane and modern approach to criminal justice. It is worth noting that no executions have been carried out in Kenya since 1987, when Ezekiah Ochuka and Pancras Oteyo Okumu, leaders of the 1982 coup d'etat attempt, were hanged for treason. This long-standing pause on executions demonstrates that the death penalty has not served as a deterrent and has not been consistently applied, further highlighting the need for its abolition. The bills presented by Chief Justice Martha Koome to Parliament, namely the Criminal Procedure Code Amendment Bill of 2023 and the Penal Code Amendment Bill 2023, are clear indications that Kenya is moving in the right direction.